This episode of Lucky Paper Radio is brought to you by Red Creatures with Reach. Look, I can't explain why, but some red creatures can block flyers. For the love of God, don't run your kite sail freebooter into a turret ogre. Some red creatures have reach! Welcome to the first episode of As Yet Unnamed Podcast. I guess I can ADR in the name later, so let's just go. Hello and welcome to Lucky Paper Radio. Great. My name is Andy, and I'm here with my co-host Anthony. Hi, Anthony.
Hi, Andy.
We're talking about Core 2021 today, but this is our first episode, so I think we should spend a little bit of time just introducing ourselves and telling people what it is we're all about. So let's just start at the top. How many PT Top 8s do you have again, Anthony?
0.
I also have 0 PT Top 8s. We are Magic players. It's a game we really enjoy and get a lot of love from, but we're not competitive players per se. Let's just say if you want to listen to the best possible Magic players talk about Magic, there are many other podcasts you could turn to that are not this podcast. So why should anybody tune in, Anthony?
That's a great question. I don't know. We didn't. I'm just gonna talk about stuff, and this is probably all. You're gonna have to edit this out. Get rid of all this. Does it make sense? Okay, great. Does it make sense for us even to introduce ourselves? Like, people don't care about us at all. I feel like we just.
Oh, they don't yet, but they're going to.
Right. So, but like, they don't yet. Like,
I think it's good to introduce yourself. Podcasts are all about the personalities you're talking to. They'll figure it out.
I mean, what I think is really important, like, we both have learned Magic in this environment of the Baltimore Magic Kitchen Table Pro Tour, which is just a group of people that love the game.
Shout out, BMKTPT.
And I think that, like, is the most wonderful name and really embodies what really interests me and a lot of these people about the game, where it's like we are completely casual kitchen table players, but we want to like learn how to optimize the game and play well in order to have a great time with our friends.
Right, yeah. I only think Magic is interesting because it is a game, and if you remove the desire to win the game, it kind of falls apart to me.
Right.
I'm looking at you, EDH. You know, it's like if you take away the sort of the core motivations of trying to compete and win and do the best you can, then the game is not super interesting. So I mean, I kind of consider myself a bit of a spike. Like I don't get excited about cards generally that are not competitive in some format because I just don't see a use for them. I'm not into brewing, super janky decks or whatever. But that said, like, yeah, we play this game for fun and not, for profit or whatever. And as a result, you and I are both very interested in Cube, as well as some other like limited or sandbox constructed formats like BattleBox, those kinds of things, because those are environments where we get to basically build our own little world, and that's like most of what is interesting about Magic to me. Is this like beautiful game connected to this like creative expression where you get to do kind of whatever you want within this big complex system.
I would agree, yeah.
Okay, we're doing great. Let's just dive right into the Core 2021 spoilers then. And so like we're not doing a set review. We're not going to go card by card. There's plenty of other places that do that, again, from professional players, which you're probably more likely to trust with your evaluations. But we just want to talk about the cards that interest us and in this game we love. So, Anthony, I want to start right at the top. Alpine Watchdog, first card in the set. We got dogs. We got dogs in Magic now.
This is great. It's so delightful to me to hear Morrow's long-term dreams finally coming true and him finally win these important battles.
Yeah, this is like an argument he had in 1998 or whatever, where he was like, we can't just call all dogs hounds, and he lost some argument. And for 20 years, the dude has been just fighting the good fight, trying to get dogs into Magic. And now we got these heckin' doggos and floofs and boofs and woofers, and they're going to run over our game.
I mean, it makes perfect sense, too. Like, I think that they were surprised with the success of the recent cats they've been printing and finding this whole, like, casual audience of people that just love their cats and love to see cats reflected in the game they love, or, even are just being introduced to and seeing a missed opportunity to be able to bring in the other side of that audience.
Dogs are great. Some people don't like when these kind of, like, less... I mean, it's kind of silly to say dogs are less serious in some ways. But I guess the idea of like cute dogs in this game is something that some people are like against. They see it as like a high fantasy thing and don't want just a Bernese Mountain Dog as a decent common in the set. I mean, probably decent, right? It's a bear with vigilance. It's probably okay. But I think it's great. I think the sort of broader that Magic reaches and the sort of more things it encompasses, the better. I would love to see more cute Magic cards. Like, bring them on. Sounds awesome to me.
I'm surprised you say more high fantasy, though, because I feel like that was the drive for so long of keeping them hounds, was this callback to Dungeons and Dragons and other sort of worlds where hounds really are a thing. Whereas dogs feel more like regular world.
Right, what I'm saying is I feel like some people don't like that dogs are in Magic now because it is not high fantasy.
I see.
It's kind of breaking the illusion that this is like this fantastical other world, because this just looks like somebody's Bernese Mountain Dog. This is just some dog named like Dan or whatever. So I feel like some people don't like it for that reason, but I'm all for it. Bring it all in,
The dog is named Dover, by the way. That's canon.
Okay, yes, sir. You're right. It is in the flavor text. This is the thing I've noticed when we talk about cards. You seem to read the flavor text of cards as they're spoiled. I never do, basically.
I only read the flavor text. When I evaluate a Magic card, the first thing I do is I look at the picture. Then I'll probably look at the mana cost, and then the flavor text. And that's it.
Picture's important.
That's all I look at.
I'm with you on the picture for sure. I don't know why it never occurs to me. Like, it seems stupid that I don't bother to read the one sentence that's down there. It would only take me half a second with every card I'm looking at. It never occurs to me to read that text. I just can't get my brain around it. Anyway, Dover, not Dan. Thank you, Anthony, for the correction.
Thank you, Dover.
We got a Baneslayer Angel reprint, Anthony. What do you think about Baneslayer Angel?
I mean, as a reprint, it doesn't really impact me that much. I don't really play any 60-card formats, so it's not going to affect me. It's already something I have the opportunity to play in cubes and kitchen table formats, but is generally like a little bit above the power level that I, focus on constructing cubes at least.
It's going to affect you in Limited when somebody plays it against you.
Yeah, but it's a mythic, and like somebody just jamming the mythic of the set and crushing you is not a new feeling.
That's a part of Limited.
Yeah.
So I gotta understand that doesn't affect you, but what do you feel about the card? Do you like these big, angry creatures with all their abilities?
Totally. I mean, I prefer the big green creatures just in terms of the particular keyword soup that they have. But yeah, I mean, I love Magic that is focused on creature combat. So being able to push the power level of creatures that just, you play them, they affect the board in a dramatic way. I am all about that.
Yeah, we'll get to the green Baneslayer later on in this particular set. It strikes me, I feel like Baneslayer Angel in this set is a good example of how much more powerful Magic has gotten since Baneslayer Angel's initial printing. Because I was not playing Magic when it was initially printed, but from listening to other players talk about it, it's apparent that it was like kind of an earth-shattering moment. Like, this creature is just completely broken. How could they possibly print such incredible stats on a creature like this? And it did, see a lot of play, whatever. And, nowadays, like, Baneslayer Angel is basically the same as Lyra Dawnbringer from Dominaria, which was in the Standard very recently, and was, like, kind of fringe played, like a sideboard card as I understand it. And, like, looking at Standard now, again, neither of us really play any constructed formats, but I do kind of watch them with interest because I like to see what cards are doing well, and I like to see what kind of decks are doing well. And it seems like Baneslayer Angel is probably not even going to be a player in this particular Standard, which is, I think, says a lot about how far Magic has come power-wise.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's power level, but also the power level is pushed in different directions, where it's all about card advantage and, playing a creature that even if it gets killed by Doomblade, it still like has some meaningful impact on the game.
The old Baneslayer versus Muldrifter debate.
Absolutely. So like compared to Uro or some of these other huge powerful cards, it just has a different play style, which I appreciate. I enjoy like the risk of just playing a big creature that doesn't immediately impact the board.
Yeah, so do you enjoy that risk? Because this is kind of a debate, specifically in the cube community. Lots of people building powerful cubes have basically entirely moved away from anything over 3 mana that doesn't give you guaranteed value if it resolves, because in an environment with plentiful removal, it just is kind of a blowout to get your Baneslayer Angel Doombladed or whatever. But some people kind of share the view you just expressed, which is that, there's something exciting about the tension of tapping out, playing your big thing, hoping your opponent doesn't have removal and getting to swing with it. Is that a part of the game you really like?
Oh, absolutely. And it's more than just crossing your fingers and hoping it survives a turn and you get to swing with it. It's also like a way to play around it. Do I try to bait out my opponent's removal spells, or do I have a protection spell that lets me sequence this in a way that I'm not losing anything out? Or do I just think like this is a matchup where I actually have more threats than they have answers and just end up pushing through that way? Like, I think there's a lot of interesting play around just regular good creatures.
Yeah, creature combat's complicated. This is the thing. This thing people take for granted. I feel like is that just how complicated having a couple of vanilla creatures in play can really make a really complicated board very quickly. Yeah, I don't know. I'm more of the kind of getting away from the Bane Slayer camp, at least in powerful environments. But even in less powerful ones, I've designed some less powerful cubes and still avoided just these kind of very swingy, if this sticks, I win. If you remove it, I lose kind of creatures. But I also wonder if there's a limit there, because the more I push that direction, the more I feel like there are fewer decisions almost. Well, not fewer decisions, different decisions to make. Like if everything you play generates this constant value, then you just kind of have these two value engines grinding up against one another. And you can remove things if you need to, but they already got value off of it. So your removal spells are all a little bit worse. And it just kind of, I think it does start to kind of homogenize games a little bit, where there is, fewer big swingy plays. And I don't know if I haven't found that limit yet. I've liked pushing the game in that direction in my various cube environments, but I do wonder if there is a limit somewhere I will hit where I'm like, you know what? I'm just tired that every time they draw Uro, they're going to, draw 2 cards, gain 6 life, and, put a creature in play. And it happens every time. And it's just so annoying that I might just, I don't know, rein it in a little bit. I haven't figured out where that line is yet.
Yeah, it's a difficult question.
All right. Let's talk about Mangara, if you are interested in talking about that. This is a card that made waves on Reddit and whatnot, because it seems to me that it is a clear concession to white EDH players who have been asking for card advantage for years. We should read these cards. These are new cards. So this is Mangara the Diplomat. It's just 3 and a white for a 2/4 with lifelink, and it says whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or planeswalkers you control, draw a card. And the same thing happens whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn. You also draw a card. So I know you to be a color pie defender. How do you feel about this implementation of white card advantage?
So I think my feeling on this has actually developed a little bit in the last couple days as I've been thinking about it.
The last couple days? Oh, we got hot takes.
Yeah, very, very hot takes.
Hot off the presses.
We're basically until now, I've absolutely been a defender of, the colors need to be distinct. If every color is the same, then there's just no color. It doesn't matter. And then all these decisions about what makes for interesting draft choices, what makes for complex diversity of different deck types, all kind of goes out the window. And so I would have totally agreed and said, this is just a concession to people that are playing the game in a certain way that it wasn't totally intended, and also in this warped way where it's well, white does have strengths, but they choose to ignore it and also specifically avoid cards that white has that are very unique and powerful. Not for no reason.
Most people
Armageddon's
don't play
not a ton of fun.
decks.
But maybe you should. But then I've been thinking more about just sort of the way that the power level has shifted to just being about card advantage. And I think it used to be more that card advantage was something you really had to dig for, and getting your 2-for-1s in any kind of format was really, really valuable and something you had to work for. Where now they've just printed all these cards. We've mentioned Uro and Oko and everything that sort of has been making waves in the last couple sets, that it's no longer something that can be relegated to just one part of the color pie. And I don't think that I'm necessarily in favor of that, but if that's the way the rest of the environment looks, then it is going to be challenging to give white specifically a strength that can counter that. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like from what I've heard from Maro talking about this, they've just kind of given up and said okay, card draw is everywhere, and that's not the thing that is distinct about any colors.
Yeah, I saw that post on his Tumblr, too, where someone asked him a question about it. And he was like, yeah, we've decided that it belongs everywhere, which is in contravention of what he's been saying for years about how the sort of color pie is meant to work. And I have always felt like the EDH players that were grumbling at Maro and complaining that white didn't have enough card draw, those people frustrated me, frankly, because, EDH is not it's a fan-made format that eventually became adopted officially by Wizards, but it's not originally how the game was meant to be played. It's not how competitive level Magic is played. And, the fact that these colors happen to have advantages and disadvantages that when you put them in a completely different context, a multiplayer game with double the life total, all of a sudden a lot of White's advantages look a lot worse and a lot of his disadvantages look a lot more severe. I don't like the idea of a format like that pushing the design of the game in one direction or another. But that said, I actually think this is a brilliant way for White to get card draw. So, like, under the pressure that R&D has been under for all these years of people complaining to them that EDH doesn't have good card advantage in White, which is a thing that I don't think it should necessarily have. I still think that they managed to design and print a card that really I think fits within the color pie and works great. I have no issues with the actual card, and I think it's okay. I felt much more like empowered by the fact that they managed to satisfy this need that these different set of players that are not me have, without doing something that I felt like undermined the sort of core of the game. So yeah, I'm not excited about that card in particular. I don't play a lot of EDH. I do sometimes, but I think I was very glad to see that they managed to make something that all those players were happy to have in their decks without doing something that I felt was, a bridge too far or whatever.
Yeah, that seems like a solid take to me. So Mangara, begrudging pass.
Yeah, it's a cool card. I'm glad it exists, right? It's not for any of the formats I play, but it doesn't offend my color pie sensibilities. I also believe firmly in the sort of value of the color pie. I share your view there, so I'm glad that he was able to satisfy everybody. Good job. I mean, good job, R&D. You did it. People don't say good job R&D enough. They say too much. You really printed Oko. You printed Companions. Blah 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 blah. Just they make good cards. They do a good job. It's a hard job. I want to talk a little bit about discontinuity. You saw this card, right? This weird mythic rare instant. So this is the 3 blue. And I promise listeners, we're not gonna be one of these podcasts that just reads card text to you. This is a pet peeve of mine in the Magic world, is that you get a lot of podcasts that just read card text. But this is the spoiler show. Okay, so these are brand new cards. We're going to talk about them. So discontinuity is a instant for 3 blue, so 6 mana, and it says end of the turn, but as long as it's your turn, the spell only costs 4 mana to cast. So if you decide to end the turn on your own turn, only costs 2 mana at instant speed. Your thoughts, Mr. Maddox?
So, I mean, I've definitely played Time Stop in plenty of EDH decks, and that's a delightful card in that context where people just don't see it coming and it ends up affecting the game in a very unique way. What I actually think is really interesting in this card, the card itself isn't super appealing to me. It's maybe playable and limited, and that's the only place I really expect to play it. It's not something that I'm interested in for a cube environment.
Still basically a 6 mana time walk for limited, kind of. I mean, they get to untap, which is, a downside.
Yeah, that is a big downside.
Aside from that.
What I think is interesting, though, is that I feel like when they were designing this card, they were talking about the different modes for it and realizing that some of the modes were just so much worse than others. And the fact that they gave it this mana discount in order just to, like, push the playability of being able to use it in different contexts is, I think, a really interesting design.
Yeah. I'm, there's the... what's that compass called that just ends your turn, activated ability?
Sundial of the Infinite.
Yeah, Sundial, Compass, those are basically the same thing. The Sundial of the Infinite, which is the artifact that lets you end your own turn whenever you want as an activated ability, has a lot of weird, interesting combos you can do with it, none of which are particularly competitive, but it's like, you get to, fizzle all your stuff that goes away at an end step or whatever and kind of fizzle those triggers if you want. So yeah, this is a cool card, I think. I can't imagine the cheaper mode being particularly useful, because you can't use it to protect your own spells, right? Because if you cast something and they cast a counter spell and you end the turn, then both those spells are going to be exiled from the stack, so you can't use it in that way. But I guess if you're playing a control deck that's holding up their instant speed removal till end of turn, you can end your turn in response to that, which could be kind of interesting. But yeah, mostly it just seems like kind of a 6 mana time stop for limited. But I agree, it's a cool card, very spicy. Wanted to give a quick shout out to Frantic Inventory. That's basically a fixed, quote unquote fixed, accumulated knowledge. So the card is a 1 and a blue instant that says draw a card, then draw cards equal to the number of cards named Frantic Inventory in your graveyard. Accumulated knowledge, one of my favorite cards to play in Pauper. But it is from the era of Magic design where it says it has the same rules text exactly, except that it counts accumulated knowledges in both yours and your opponent's graveyard, because that's a thing they used to do all the time, is basically look at yours and your opponent's permanents and graveyards for counting things. And that made it very weird in mirrors. You'd always side it out if you're playing against somebody that had the accumulated knowledges in their deck, because you don't want to feed into their accumulated knowledges. So that's a cool card. I'm glad we get to see that. All right. Stormwing Entity. Anthony, this is the next one I want to talk about. So this is 5 mana for a 3/3 flying creature with prowess. But similar to that discontinuity spell we just talked about, it costs 2 and a blue less to cast if you've cast another instant or sorcery spell this turn, and when it enters the battlefield, you scry 2. A lot of rules text on this thing. Basically, it's not a great base rate. I mean, it's fine. I'll play this thing limited even if I have no instant sorceries in my deck for sure. But it also has this ability to be a 2 mana 3/3 with prowess if you've cast an instant or sorcery the turn. So basically, you cast a cantrip on turn 3 and then use your remaining 2 mana to play a 3/3 with prowess, get your scry 2. What do you think of this card?
I think it's great. I mean, it's just each one of these abilities is something I like. So when you roll it up together, it seems like a really fun card to play with. Like, yeah, you can get these like fun turns where you ain't managed to get it out much sooner, which is a fun little mini game. And then it being an evasive threat that does give you a little bit of value just on the scry on ETB is pretty cool. I'm also really excited to see prowess coming back. Recently we've just seen instant or sorcery buffing your creature, which just to me it reads a little bit awkwardly, and in limited it makes such a little difference between prowess and instant or sorcery matters, that I think prowess is just a lot cleaner.
Yeah, I'm excited to see prowess back too. It's one of my favorite abilities, and I know that it was once evergreen, and then they decided to un-evergreen it because of basically complexity, as I understand it. It was just
really?
Rules-wise a little too complicated for what they consider to be evergreen. And I actually don't know if they have since said that it is evergreen again, or if they're just sticking it in this core set because, whatever. I think it could be evergreen, though.
Yeah,
personally.
specifically because it's a core
complicated.
set. I feel like, whether it's evergreen or, just a thing they have on hand that they'll use again, it seems pretty likely it'll stick around.
I have mixed feelings about these cards with the discounts. It actually seems like a weird kind of sub-theme in Core 2021. There are cards in multiple colors that have these discounted costs if you do some other thing. And sometimes I love these cards because I feel like they really shake up how you would otherwise sequence your plays, and take what would be kind of like a given, like, well, I'm obviously going to play these cards in this order because it just makes sense, and make you really question, like, well, if I play slightly out of optimal order, I get this advantage potentially, which sometimes I really like that, and then sometimes I feel like it's just the worst. It's the worst kind of play patterns because it's like, all right, now you're forcing me basically to play in the wrong order because I get this advantage, but then it just gets removed or whatever, and all that sort of missequencing of my spells I get kind of punished for, or I just happen to not have an instant or sorcery. Now I'm playing this card that's below rate for whatever the environment I'm in is. So I don't know where I come down on these kinds of things. I don't like them in my cube. I know that much, but I have. I was trying to find this card by searching on Scryfall, but my search skills are failing me. Do you know is it Illusory Angel? I think it's
Illusory Angel. Guess what I'm looking at right now.
Illusory Angel.
I think that's a great comparison. I kind of like that it's similar to that, a little bit more restrictive, but it kind of has this like second mode where Illusory Angel, if you have nothing in your hand and you draw it, it's like the worst top deck. Basically, if you think of this the opposite way, where it's like it's an Illusory Angel, but if you like draw it late, you can just cast it for an expensive thing. I like that a lot more.
Yeah, so I've played Illusory Angel in my battle box. I don't know if it's in there right now, but it was in there for a long time, and I definitely had a love-hate relationship with that thing. And I actually do think I ended up cutting it for those reasons you mentioned. Like, it's just a terrible top deck if you have no cards in hand because you actually can't play it. And then if you do get to play it, on turn 4 in addition to a 1-drop, it's kind of unfair. You get a 3-mana 4/4 flyer, and it's like just very swingy. So yeah, I don't know, but I agree that, as compared to Illusory Angel, Storming Entity is vastly preferred because it's like you basically took the extremes and kind of narrowed them a little bit. The floor is much better because you can actually cast it as opposed to not being able to cast it. And in this case, just because of power level, the ceiling is a little higher, but Illusory Angel is an uncommon, so Yeah. Yeah. We got phasing back, Anthony.
What? Why?
That is the thing I really honestly never thought I would see. There's a couple of things that have surprised me out of Magic in the past couple of years. Return of phasing is one of them, and the other one that really surprises me is the return of like color matters stuff, protection from colors, hexproof from colors. These are things that I felt were like very indicative of the early days of Magic, and I felt like in a lot of ways like R&D had evolved in how they were thinking about designing the cards and mechanics, and kind of moved away from these weird hosers and phasing, which is this really clunky thing in terms of rules. But we're back. So we got phasing back.
I do think this particular implementation of phasing makes a lot of sense, though. When I first thought, it's like, well, this like one mythic that has this bonkers ability. Is it worth like the rule support and like adding this complexity to?
Is it worth the judge calls? There's going to be a lot of judge calls.
Well, I mean, we'll see whenever people get to play Magic in paper again.
Right. There'll be a lot of chats on the Judge IRC.
But, like, frankly, like, Magic is a game that's dedicated to supporting all previous versions of the game, so, like, the rule support is there. And this particular implementation plays a lot better than, like, if you just put phasing as a static ability on something, it's extremely confusing. But if you basically just reinterpret this as, like, exile it until end of turn, and it's actually even worse than exile it until end of turn, because it doesn't, knock off equipments and enchantments and counters.
Doesn't kill tokens. The thing still has,
tokens. So yeah, I mean, like, I think it's going to play out pretty cleanly, and people are going to be like, oh yeah, sure, this doesn't exist for a moment. That's fine.
Yeah, it's one of those rules.
Very flavorful.
It is one of those rules that, it's almost like, it's kind of like Trample in the sense that if you describe it basically, you're like, oh, it just does this. Then it's actually kind of intuitive to newer players or less experienced players. But then when you get into the details of like, well, wait a minute. Like, your card has Trample and I'm blocking with, your card has Trample and Death Touch now and I'm blocking with this creature and then I'm going to sacrifice it after block. It's like all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, how does this rule actually work? But yeah, I agree that I think it's much clearer to have phasing as a, like, phase, just this thing phases out as opposed to phasing as a static ability. Here's a hot take. I don't think this card is actually very good, partially because I don't think phasing is very strong. Like a -3 to phase something out, it just seems way worse. I mean, it's way worse than bouncing to someone's hand. I think it's significantly worse than exiling a thing and returning at the beginning of the end step, like a flicker. So even though this is a Planeswalker we get to activate on our opponent's turns, which is it's a new ability we've gotten, never seen before. It doesn't generate card advantage because the first thing is just looting. It's not actually, generating any actual card advantage. It's just card filtering. And then, I don't think the down tick is very good because, if you down tick on your opponent's turn to protect your Teferi, then if you happen to board wipe on your turn, your opponent's creature is essentially saved from that board wipe. If you down tick on your own turn, the creature will have, not have summoning sickness, still have all its auras and equipment attached. It doesn't seem extremely pushed, which is actually a little bit, relieving given some of the things we've seen recently. But yeah, I don't know. I love the art. I love the art so much.
Very cool. I especially love the alt art for it. I think you're right. It is a little bit less powerful than it initially reads, unless, I mean, we've said that before about Planeswalkers and been proven wrong, but I agree. I don't think it's going to be extremely powerful, especially in limited. I do think it's quite powerful in EDH because it does interact with a lot of things you can't otherwise interact with.
Yes,
and the fact that you get to tick it up so much faster. So if it is not interacted with, you can potentially have a 4-mana time stretch.
Yes,
take some turns.
Time stretch.
Not quite time stretch. Time stretch does. Oh yeah, time stretch. Cool.
Yeah, time stretch.
You did it. Context is key, but I think in a lot of formats it's going to play out a little worse than it looks.
Yeah, I agree. It's got all these abilities, but ultimately it's like, well, I don't know.
I do love looting, though.
I do like looting, but I'll always prefer brainstorming,
So I will say, if I am playing blue and I open this in a game of limited, or if I, open it pack 1, I'm going to try it at least once. I don't draft off enough to be able to say, like, I'm just here purely as a spike, and I want to optimize everything. And I've seen all these rares and mythics are a dime a dozen. It's like I'm probably only going to get between 0 and 1 opportunities to play it in limited, and I will give it a try.
You've been drafting quite a bit on Arena. You might see it a lot there.
We'll see. Now that
I agree with you.
Is finally on Mac, I might ramp up my drafting a little bit.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I would take this too, even though I'm not rating it very highly in any format, frankly, but especially in limited. Yeah, like you said, it's just kind of very very non-effective for a 4-mana spell. But yeah, I would take it for sure. I'm not going to not play the Mythic Planeswalker in limited. It's too much fun, at least once.
On the other hand, do you want to talk about this whale?
Oh, do I? This card. This is probably my favorite card from the set, the card I'm most excited about. We are talking about Waker of Waves here. Why don't you read the card, Anthony? I've done too much card reading.
Well, I'm just going to read it how it actually plays. It says, 2 mana, discard this card, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the other into your graveyard. That's
at instant speed.
basically the whole text. Yeah, it's an instant. But it has the second mode where you can pay 7 to have a 7/7 whale, and creatures your opponents control get -1, -0.
Yeah, shrink all the power. Yeah, this is I love cards like this because we get, like you said, this sort of activated ability. This it's kind of like a variant of cycling, but instead you get to sleight of hand or whatever, or strategic planning, whichever one's look at the top 2 and bin 1 and take 1. Yeah, I mean that's the way you're going to play it most of the time, and it is not what the card looks like. If you show this to an inexperienced player, they'd be like, "Oh, it's a big whale," and they'd probably forget that mode even existed. But mostly you're going to do that, and then sometimes you're late in the game and you just get a 7/7. You got to put a 7/7 in your deck for 7 mana with with basically no deck building cost. I love this card.
Yeah.
I think it's very powerful. I'm very excited to jam this right in my cube. It's the card I'm most excited about from the set. I love the fact that control decks get to run win conditions that are also not taking up space in the deck otherwise. It's the same reason I really love Realm Cloaked Giant. It's the same reason I really like Shark Typhoon. These kind of new cards we're getting that are these modal cards where you get to be a spell the control deck already wants, and then you also just get to be a big dumb idiot that can attack them and win the game, which is great.
It's basically the blue Krosan Tusker, which is the green Divination. So the other thing I really, really love about this is I love, so my own cube environment is very much lower powered, but based on lots of overlapping synergy to try and create as much depth of different kinds of archetypes you can draft as possible. And this just keys so many things. If you care about discard or getting two cards into the graveyard, reanimating stuff, it just enables so many other strategies. And I have another cube that is focused sort of around cycling and card draw and similar mechanics that I'm really excited to jam it in there.
Yeah, I wonder if there's going to be some kind of janky off-meta Reanimator deck in Standard, because we got this in addition to all of the big cycling cards like the Titanoth and the Death Corona or whatever, the what was the actual Void Beckoner from Ikoria. We got these big creatures that can basically bin themselves with an activated ability and give you some other benefit, whether it's drawing another card or doing something. So yeah, I wonder if that could actually become a deck that comes together. Similar to what we said earlier, Anthony, I feel like this is kind of this is on the similar area as the Baneslayer Muldrifter spectrum. Do you think Wizards could push this idea too far, such that you get so many modal spells, you have to run no win conditions as a control deck, and so your deck just becomes nothing but the cards you need at the right moment? Is that something you're worried about them pushing too far and making the game too homogenous?
I mean, that's definitely possible. And if you think about it that way, it's like, you know what you're going to do with this on turn 2, you know what you're going to do with it on turn 7. I think the way Mara was talking about variance in an article recently where he's saying, this is a higher variance card because it's going to do different things at different times. But if you think about that on a different scale of how does it affect the gameplay, it's actually much lower variance because you just do the thing that you need based on the turn. It ends up homogenizing things, like you're saying. I think that's definitely possible. But that's why we play Cube.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, it's actually kind of a lot like a Planeswalker. I mean, that's what makes Planeswalkers great in Control, is that you have abilities, hopefully, that generate card advantage that affect the board, but then you also have a Planeswalker sitting there such that if your opponent doesn't answer it, it will eventually win you the game. And so you get to put, a 4 or 5 mana Planeswalker in your deck that does something to also keep you alive and stifle your opponent's game plan, but is also just a win condition. You just sit there long enough and, you get milled out with Jace or whatever. So, yeah, it's actually, I think it plays in a similar space. I think this is also something we're seeing. I think this kind of push is related to all of the best of one stuff happening on Arena.
Totally.
This feels like a best of one card to me, where it's like we're minimizing variance so that you don't just lose because you drew all your finishers and not enough mana, or you drew all your card advantage but not enough finishers. And I like it in that sense. I'm really happy with pushes that direction, because I'm always happy to minimize variance if I can. There's enough variance already from drawing from a random deck. It's my opinion, generally speaking. I went through, Anthony, and did a quick pass of all of the cards in the set, and I didn't really know anything in black that I wanted to talk about, but I noticed you had a couple cards listed here in black. So what are the black cards that are jumping out at you?
So I picked out a couple black cards that I think are interesting. Specifically, I've been experimenting, like very much just as an experiment, in building a mono black cube. So there are a couple things I thought were interesting, because I'm like the point of this cube is to figure out if we can make a like viable, fun environment to play in without color. And as you know, I think color is very important. So I think the experiment is probably going to verify that. Maybe
this is like somebody that's like afraid
science.
of spiders, like going to a spider zoo.
Yeah,
what's a place for the keep a lot of
zoo,
spiders?
Yeah. An arachnarium.
There you go. Thank you. An arachnarium, and just spending the whole afternoon there, just thinking about them.
I think that Demonic Embrace is particularly interesting because I'm especially trying to push the macro archetypes from aggressive to more controlling. And Demonic Embrace just seems like this extremely evasive, recurable threat that I'm excited about.
Yeah.
Also,
so let's read the card.
Paying life. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Demonic Embrace is 1 black for an aura enchant creature. And it gives the enchanted creature +3/+1. It gives it flying, and it makes it a demon in addition to its other types. But then importantly, you can cast it from your graveyard by paying 3 life and discarding a card in addition to its other costs. So like you said, this is it's a very powerful aura. I mean, +3/+1 and flying is big game for 3 mana. And in some ways, it doesn't really offset the sort of danger and like the risk you assume by running auras because you get 2 for 1 by a removal spell. That's still very present. But the fact that you get to play this from your graveyard does make that hurt a little less. You can turn extra lands late game into just, further evasive threats. And I can definitely imagine, a lot of the aggro decks that I'm used to playing, both in, cube and also limited formats, eventually you got them down pretty low, but they just eventually stabilize with enough ground blockers and removal spells for your flyers or evasive threats, and you're kind of stuck there. And this just turns every card you draw into another evasive threat they have to deal with. So I think it's going to be a really strong card. People are going to get bodied by this card, I think. Yeah,
and it's not strictly card advantage because you do have to discard a card to be able to recast it. But the fact that it, as flying and a huge power boost means you're going to pay 3 mana, you're going to get a bunch of damage through, and then later on you can, hopefully it gives you some reach to the aggro deck.
Right.
And then it also, again, like it has a lot of other aspects that other cards can key off of, and you can work with. Like sometimes you might want to discard something specific so that you can reanimate it or, fuel delve or whatever you need to do. Plus, paying life, honestly, in the mono black environment, there are ways that paying life can actually be used to your advantage.
Yeah, I think it's a sweet design. I'm really into it. If mono black aggro weren't just so heartbreaking to me right now, my own cube, I'd be considering it probably. But I just keep, you said it's not card advantage, and you're right. Strictly speaking, it's not. But there is something to the idea that like, really, in a lot of aggro decks, drawing your 5th land, you might as well not have even drawn that card.
That's fair.
And in a way, this becomes a kind of card advantage situationally because, your cards, your lands at certain points in a lot of aggro decks, if you're lacking mana sinks, like cards like Knight of the Even Legion or whatever, if you don't have those kind of cards, then really your lands might as well not even draw a card. You could have just skipped your draw step if you're drawing your 5th land because you're not doing anything with it. So, yeah, that is very powerful, I think. Also, and even sweet art.
Like discarding it to some other effect, and then if it's not relevant at a time, and then being able to buy it back later if it does become relevant is a cool interaction.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. I agree. What else you got in black?
So similarly, or maybe not so similarly, I just really love Liliana's Devotee. So this is a 3-mana 2/3. It's a zombie lord giving them all +1 power. And at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, you can pay 2 to make a 2/2 zombie, which is a 3/2 zombie because of the lord ability. I have been trying a little bit in a couple different environments to be able to make a black-red sacrifice sort of archetype work.
Little aristocrats thing going on.
A little bit of an aristocrats thing. And I think it's really cool because that sacrifice isn't giving you value on its own. It just is like a lot of different kinds of value engines brought together that sort of add up to this sort of sacrifice theme. So this is sort of an interesting thing that plays into that space where you can just continue to make tokens. And I mean, honestly, the fail case in a lower powered environment of just like, I'll swing in, something's going to die, it doesn't matter which side of the board something dies on, and then just paying and activating this to get 5 power on the board over 2 bodies is not too shabby.
Yeah. No, it's a cool card. I did a little double take at Liliana's Standard Bearer, which seems like it's almost kind of in a bit of a series with this card. This one's at rare. It's a 3-mana 3/1 with flash. And when it enters the battlefield, you get to draw X cards, where X is the number of creatures that died under your control this turn. Similar space it's playing in, and I think quite powerful. I mean, a 3/1 with flash is a removal spell for a lot of attacking creatures, and as an alternative, you'd be able to clean up after a board wipe or something and just draw a bunch of cards. Seems like it could be very good.
Definitely.
I will say I don't like the art on Liliana's Devotee. It's weird.
Yeah, that's the worst part about it. So that and the fact
doesn't
that
it break your heart when they print a card you love that just has art that doesn't tug at your heartstrings?
Yes, yeah, and even honestly, obviously, I love a lot of the characters, but when they put something that is a pretty all-purpose card, all-purpose spell, and they call it Chandra's Fire, it's like, well, couldn't this just have been regular fire?
Any lady's fire?
Yeah. I mean, it's just like
perfectly normal fire.
Actually, I mean specifically like Chandra's what's it called? Chandra's Pyrohelix versus Twin Bolt, I think. I just like Twin Bolt is much more descriptive, and when I'm trying to build an environment where people are encountering a lot of new cards they're not familiar with, that flavor is actually very powerful, where associating these cards just with the sort of personality of one of these characters is less evocative to me.
Yeah, I think that's something that you and I share because we play so many formats that are like eternal, essentially. Like,
right.
We're playing these like sandbox formats, we can do whatever we want. And so like anytime there's a specific call out to a plane or something hyper specific to the story, usually is not my favorite thing for me personally. But I also totally get why they do it, because they are
for sure, because it's in this context of this environment, it is very much reinforcing the flavor that they're going for. It's just when we're picking a little bit from everywhere, all those bits of flavor end up not adding up to a story. They just add up to a little bit of noise.
Yeah, it's true. I kind of wish they would just like print very generic versions of a lot of spells that basically are like very tied to the story in a specific set. Like, what if they came out with like a core 2021 alternative product that had all these named cards but just very generic, nice and removed from these specific contexts, and it was like a showcase product or whatever. I'd buy that. I don't know. Getting very narrow there, though. I don't think the market's very big.
Yeah, I don't know.
I see here you also are interested in Malefic Scythe? Is that how you say that word?
That seems good to me. Yeah, I think it's interesting.
Malefic?
We've been seeing more and more colored artifacts, and this seems like a very flavorful one. Obviously feels very black. But I think I've found myself in a situation where there's a little bit of a gulf in some of the power of equipments, where there's some extremely, extremely powerful equipments, and then a lot of sort of like standard draft chaff. And I think this is actually pretty powerful. It forces you to try and build around it, and sort of like line up your plays in a certain way that I'm curious to see how it plays out, both in limited and possibly in some cube environments.
Yeah, equip 1 is always the thing that jumps out at me.
Yes, absolutely.
That's I think really important here. And yeah, I think the rate is decent. You're right that equipment has a problem that we see pop up a lot of times when they introduce new mechanics, which is that it's not always completely abundant how the mechanic needs to be balanced. So you get cards like Bone Splitter or Umezawa's Jite that then completely blow the doors off of the equipment balance, and they have to like really walk that back really far. And the same thing happened with Smuggler's Copter in when they introduced vehicles. That vehicle was just really much more pushed than all the other vehicles by a pretty big margin. Like the one you could crew with Planeswalkers. What was that one?
Heart of Kiran.
Heart of Kiran was quite good in standard too, but it's still nothing compared to Smuggler's Copter. So we see that quite often, is that they have to roll things back after they push a little too far.
Yeah, I also
I'd
like
rather
that
they do that to be safe, though. I want to see them pushing boundaries, having to ban cards. It's fine with me.
Yeah, absolutely. I also like that it sort of scales with the game. It's not like you're having your opponent play a Bone Splitter on turn 2, and you're just like, well, I'm dead to this, because a 3 mana for initially just +1/+1 isn't going to do a lot. But if you do get to build around it a little bit, you can end up making a pretty powerful board impact.
Yeah, it really changes the combat math a lot, I think, because normally where you'd be happy to trade with the card, now if that trading is going to mean they get another counter on their Scythe, which means they're going to make their evasive creature that 1 point bigger, it really, I think, changes your plan. That could be a battle box card. I can see that going in my battle box. I like how that works. Very cool. All right, should we move on to red?
Sure.
What did you have called out in red here?
I have very little. I'm a little bit interested in Hobble Fiend for some of the same reasons as just another way to get some value out of sacrificing your creatures. Like, especially I could see Liliana's Devotee and Hobble Fiend together. It's slow, it's a little bit expensive, but getting a little value engine set up is pretty appealing to me.
Hobble Fiend has a lot going on for a 2-mana common, I feel like.
Yeah.
Instant speed sack outlets are very, very good. You know, you get to sacrifice stuff you'd otherwise be chump blocking with. You get to sacrifice things in response to removal spells. And yeah, I mean, the body's okay. 2 mana, 2/1 with trample, it scales up. Threat of activation when you go into combat is going to be real. So yeah,
that's a
card
great point.
seems pretty good.
And I really love the 1 mana cost. It's like enough to force you to, commit to keeping that up. It's not just totally a free roll, which I like.
Pretty messed up if it was actually free to sacrifice. Those free sacrifice effects tend to be pretty messed up historically. Turns out it's good to be able to sacrifice your own stuff.
How about you, though? Are you excited for some goblins?
So, yeah, let's talk about Snoop in a second. While we're on the sort of the subject of 2-mana creatures, I am low-key in love with Heartfire Immolator.
Really?
This is a 2-mana 2/2 with Prowess, 1 and a red for a 2/2 with Prowess. And it has an activated ability. You can pay a red to sacrifice it and deal damage equal to its power to target a creature or planeswalker. This is like the early contender in this set for me of like this is the card that I feel like should have existed forever. Like it's a beautiful, simple idea that just like is just the right power level, and I think it's really effective. It's a powerful card, and I'm like, this is a great example of a card that I think it's going to go in my cube, even though my cube is about as pushed as an unpowered cube can get in terms of power level. I think it totally hangs there. I think it's going to be a really good, solid player in limited environment. I'm also going to add this to my monocolored starter decks. So Anthony knows I have a 60-card deck of each monocolor, which I have designed for the purposes of teaching people how to play Magic, and also for the purposes of me exploring how to like try and manifest the color pie in single color decks so that I can kind of tell the story of the color pie to people as they're learning to play the game. And the sort of red deck has a prowess theme going on, and this is just a perfect slot into that deck. I just love when they print these clean cards. It reminds me of like Voracious Hydra, which is a beautiful clean card. I felt the similar way about Scour All Possibilities from MH1. I was like such a great, not too strong, not too weak, just always does stuff, really clean and elegant. So I'm excited about that too. But the Snoop, yeah. I mean, the Snoop is kind of messed up. This card is going to be interesting to watch in a number of formats. I have some friends that are brewing this in Vintage. People are talking about it possibly being relevant in Modern. This is the Goblin Rogue, red for a 2/2 that lets you play with the top card of your library revealed, and you can cast Goblin spells from the top of your library. And then as long as the top card of your library is a Goblin, Snoop has activated abilities of that card. So that there's a couple interesting combos you can read about if you want. It's, get your Goblin Recruiter and put your Kiki Jiki and a Haste Enabler on top, make copies of itself, blah, 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 whatever. But just a really... I have a Goblin deck in EDH. I love Goblins, and my Goblin deck is specifically designed to kind of push back against the natural tide of EDH, where everyone just kind of sits back and doesn't attack each other and does their own little value engines or combos or something. So my deck is designed specifically to like make everybody attack each other and go nuts. It's designed around the Goad commander, Grenzo from Conspiracy, and this is obviously just a auto include there, and could not be more excited to have such a powerful card. Every line of text is just great.
Yeah, I mean, that ability to play cards off the top of your library is extremely powerful, and like when you do that the first time and you're like, oh, I basically just drew 3 cards. It's pretty nuts.
It's one of my favorite abilities. I mean, the original printing of that ability, Future Sight, is still one of my favorite cards. I got my beautiful little old foil of it. I don't even play it anywhere. I just like having it because how much I love that ability. I love Bolas' Citadel. You know this about me, Anthony. It's great. Experimental Frenzy. All of these abilities. It's just, I think that's a really cool effect, and I'm glad they are putting it more and more into things because it's really fun. It's fun. It's fun to play cards off the top of your library.
It really is.
Yeah. Should we talk about this Chandra's Incinerator, this burning creature on the edge of a cliff?
Oof. I don't know. It doesn't even have any flavor text.
It doesn't have any flavor text. This is a good example of this is a card that's right in the same category of Stormwing's Entity. It's got a discount to play it, and to me, it's kind of like a more extreme version of the Entity, where the base rate is much worse, but the potential ceiling is way higher. So just to read the card, it's 5 in a red, so a lot of mana for a 6/6 with Trample. But it costs X less to cast, where X is the total amount of non-combat damage dealt to your opponents this turn. And then, whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that player controls. So this is like just a really nutty burn piece for Constructed in a lot of formats. It'll be interesting to see how much play it ends up seeing, because it does kind of have this best-case scenario thinking where you look at it and you're like, oh man, I can play this on turn 2 if I just suspend Riftbolt on turn 1 and then Lightning Bolt my opponent on turn 2 and play this for 1 mana and then just, go crazy. But when it doesn't happen, it's a 6 mana spell, and 6 mana spells need to be incredibly good, and frankly, it's not good at 6 mana, so you don't ever want to be casting it for that much mana, I don't think. Very swingy card, I think.
Is this something you would consider for your Vintage Cube? It seems like, even though you support red aggro very much, you don't necessarily support just like red burn.
Yeah, I think supporting actual burn in a cube is very difficult, because you have to run just, so many burn spells that it takes up so much space for other stuff. And the burn spells are spells that you're going to be competing with any red-based deck for. I mean, every deck will take burn spells. So really, the cubes I have seen that do support burn tend to run like dedicated stuff for the burn decks, like actual Lava Spikes or Flame Rift, the card that deals 4 damage to both players, where, control decks wouldn't want that, for example. I'm not going to run it, not just because I don't really support burn, but because it, even though it's a very powerful card and I think could definitely win games and be very relevant in my cube, it's not the kind of play I want to encourage, where if you just happen to draw your deck in the wrong order, it's a terrible card, Yeah. Which is also why I plan on testing Stormwing's Entity, because I think it's more reasonable than this. Like here on Incinerator, I think the floor is pretty horrible and the ceiling is insane. And on Stormwing's Entity, it's like the floor is okay. I mean, it's not what I want to be doing for 5 mana in cube, but it's at least something. And then the ceiling is like pretty good, but not busted. This is like,
and your blue decks want to be playing as many like brainstorms and ponders as they possibly can, whereas like the aggressive red decks don't really want to be playing pointing their lightning bolts at their opponent's face if they need to get all their 2/1s in.
Exactly. Yeah. I think the question for whether Stormwing's Entity will work in blue in my cube is like, how many times does the blue deck in my cube want to spend turn 3 casting a cantrip and a 3/3 with prowess? And sometimes maybe, but I usually don't want to go shields down that early. I want to be holding up counter magic or flash creatures or something on my opponent's 3rd or 4th turn. So I think that's really the question. I think it's quite good for tempo no matter what, but there are so many cards that are good in tempo and also good in control, and I don't know how much I like Entity in control.
It could be fun with Scout's Warning.
That's true. Scout's Warning is something. I really like that. Scout's Warning is a card I really like in Battle Box.
It's a fan.
Oof, beautiful. And they say white doesn't get card draw. You get Scout's Warning.
Come on.
Card's beautiful. Have some respect.
Every color should have card draw. Just put some blue cards in your deck.
Yeah, it's true. And why not run blue? Blue's good. Anthony, we've arrived at green, so we should start talking about the green Baneslayer Angel of the set.
Oh boy,
Elder Gargaroth.
Wow.
I mean, I would say this would be one of your favorite cards, but it's got no flavor text.
It's got no flavor text. I mean, that's not the most important thing. I tend to like cards that have not necessarily a drawback, but like some play to them, and this card is just all upside. It's like, here's the whole menu. You can have all of it. You just slam this and go to town.
Well, specifically, you have to choose one, Anthony, because the rule text does say it's 3 and 2 green, so 5 mana for a beast 6/6 with vigilance, reach, and trample. So 3 very powerful keywords, especially the combination of the 3 of them. I think is very potent because you get to swing every turn. They can't jump block it. And you get to still keep it up as a blocker for anything, including flyers, which is very powerful. And then every time it attacks or blocks, you get to either make a 3/3 beast token, gain 3 life, or draw a card. So it does a lot of ding-dang things, and I compared it to Baneslayer Angel because it's very, very, very pushed for its rate. I mean, 5 mana for all of that is quite a lot of creature.
Yeah, I mean, I'm delighted just to put a Colossal Dreadmaw in a deck and knocking off a mana cost, giving it 2 more keywords, and then this ridiculous value every turn. It's pretty insane.
It's actually a little weird to me that it's in the set with Colossal Dreadmaw, just because of how directly they compare and how enormously worse Dreadmaw is. Though honestly, at the end of the day,
they don't have an
what
option because Colossal Dreadmaw is in every set.
That is true. I mean, whether they mention it or not, it's always
It's
there.
in there.
I mean, they haven't said, that dinosaurs are on Mirrodin or whatever, but like, they are. They just haven't mentioned it yet. You know, they've never bothered to say it. Yeah, it's here's the thing. You say it has no downside. I think it does very clearly have a downside, which is that a lot of removal spells cost less than 5 mana, and you can get this thing removed, and then I actually don't. For as push as this card is, I don't know if it's going to see any play in Standard. I don't know if it's good enough.
Huh. Okay.
I feel like I learned this lesson for myself most viscerally with Doom Whisperer last year, or was it even 2 years ago at this point? Time is a real illusion. But when Doom Whisperer was spoiled, the 5-mana 6/6 with flying and trample, and you get to pay 2 life to surveil 2, I was like, oh man, this card is incredible. I'm so excited to put this in my queue. I've never, Black doesn't get very many good 5-drops. This is just so pushed. And my experience playing with it was just that, it just eats removal spells all the time. And it's bad when it does, because you're way down on mana. And similarly, Doom Whisper, I think, also saw fringe Standard play, but was definitely not a staple of Standard when it was in rotation. And is it still in rotation? Well, I'm not good at this stuff. Either way, it was definitely not a major player in Standard, and I feel like Gargaroth is going to probably be in a similar category. Now, the one thing it might save it is that green is very good right now. There's a lot of good green cards, so I think it's already in a deck it's already in a color that is going to be doing quite well. But the question is, will it ever earn a slot in any of these Standard decks? And I'm not actually sure.
Yeah, I mean, if it's competing with things like Vivian, it's going to be difficult, actually.
Yeah, Vivian's amazing. I love that card.
On the other hand, you could try and ramp it out a little bit early. What do you think about this next guy? Llanowar Visionary.
This is a 3-mana 2/2 that enters the battlefield and draws a card, and then it taps to add a green mana. So this is a kind of cheeky combination of Elvish Visionary and Llanowar Elf into Llanowar Visionary.
I feel like this should have been a Modern Horizons cards. They did so many of those mix and match kind of things.
They did so much of that. That was honestly... I want this show to be primarily positive because I love this game and I love talking about it and I just want to be positive about this game. But boy, I was so upset by all of the things in Modern Horizons that had preposterous names. About? They only made sense if you ever saw the original cards. Otherwise, it was just here's the Ranger Captain of the Commander Revios. And it's stop it. Just stop it.
That's fine. You see that in a vacuum, you're like, that's a fantasy name. No problem.
Just come up with new names.
Pondering Mage and all kinds of great stuff.
Giver of Runes. Why should... That's not... Anyway. I don't know if this card is good or bad. I can't really figure it out. But I'm curious to know what you think about it, Anthony. You're a green mage.
I think it's just delightful in Limited. Yeah, 3 mana, 2/2 draw card.
For sure.
Quite strong. It's a little bit awkward to have a 3-mana ramp spell, but not that bad.
Yeah, I don't know if this was spurned by this card specifically, but there was a conversation on a Reddit thread this week, which spilled over into some conversation on a couple Discords about how good a Grizzly Bear that cantripped was. So just you wanted a green for a 2/2, enter the battlefield, draw a card. I'm curious to hear your take on this, Anthony. How good do you think that card would be?
I mean, context is everything, but...
Well, choose a context and give it an evaluation.
I mean, in a limited format where that is there's a aggressive deck that works, that seems extremely strong.
Yeah, I think it's the thing about that card is that it's always good, right? It's never bad, right? Yeah, I mean, you just get a free bear, draw a card. I actually think it would be fine and limited. I could see them putting that at uncommon, and it'd be a very strong uncommon, probably the best in green or whatever. But I don't think it would be warping the entire meta around the existence of this card.
Right.
Where most of the disagreement comes into play is whether or not that card is playable in constructed formats and how playable it is. I've seen everything from people saying that it's completely boring and just not effective and doesn't compete with any of the stuff going on in any Eternal formats and wouldn't even see play, to people insisting it would be a staple of Modern and Legacy for all time and just replace Tarmogoyf and Death Shadow and all these other kind of efficient threats. I don't know where I come down on that. The comparisons are like, you can kind of compare it to like Baleful Strix / Icefang Quaddle, which are both 2-mana creatures that can trip and have some other upside. In their cases, they have Death Touch and Flash, respectively, or the other one can have both. But like, Elvish Visionary is not a particularly great card. It sees play in some like tribal decks in some formats, but it's not incredible. So yeah, that's an interesting question to me. I don't think they'll ever print that card for a lot of reasons, or at least not anytime soon. I should never say never when it comes to Magic, because time is long, and they'll do a lot of things eventually. But
how do you think it compares to Burning Tree Emissary?
I mean, it's a lot better than Burning Tree Emissary, I think.
I think so.
I do think so. I mean, Burning Tree Emissary is like very good in aggressive decks. I almost think of it as like a mono red card, except it has a green ability because it also makes the mana. But yeah, I think the fact that as a top deck, Emissary is just a Grizzly Bear makes it a lot worse. Whereas this as a top deck is drawing your cards and doing good stuff. So yeah, I don't know. I personally just emotionally, viscerally, I can't really see it being relevant in Legacy. I could see it in like Yorion decks, which are already playing 60 cards and have tons of little cantrippy guys. I think you can make room in a deck like that for it. But I don't feel like it would replace threats in Jund or whatever and become a new staple. But maybe it would. I don't know.
It's possible.
Magic is so interesting to me that we can have these kinds of like. I've seen like very skilled players and experienced players like disagree dramatically on how good a card like that would be, and it's such a simple card, and it's the fact that we can still have disagreements about how good a card like that would be just says so much about the depth of this game.
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, Llanowar Visionary, back to our point of discussion, I think it's a very cool Magic card. I don't know if I'll actually play it anywhere, but we'll be happy to pick it up in Limited.
Yeah, I like it. I see some people are testing it in their cubes. It's not going to make it into mine because I don't really want to be ramping at 3 mana, and I also don't really want to be just drawing a card and making a kind of irrelevant body. So I think I'd rather have either, I'd rather have a really good threat on 3 than
that's fair.
I think something that is kind of hedging its bets, which isn't, contravention to what I said earlier about, really liking these kind of incremental cards that give you guaranteed value and just like slowly build up your presence. But I don't know. It doesn't do anything for me, I don't think.
Maybe I'm not giving enough credit because really, when you think about ramp spells, they are very much they're tempo spells. You're giving up some value, like you're spending a card in order to accelerate and get a bigger threat out faster. And even though this is like at 3 mana, not usually where you want to be playing your ramp spells in a lot of environments, it does just remove that and says, yeah, we'll ramp and then draw you more value so you can hopefully draw something to actually be able to cast with that mana.
Right. Yeah, that's one of my I love that framing of like mana dorks and ramp spells where it's like this is a tempo play the same way that like a 1 mana 2/1 in an aggro deck is a tempo play. It's a body that is not actually relevant. This card as a 1/1, you never put a 1/1 for 1 in constructed decks that are looking to ramp out. The whole reason you play it is because of how much better it is to play a 4-drop on turn 3 or whatever. And so you need really good 4-drops, 5-drops, or whatever to make up for the fact that you're really down on card advantage, because it's like basically card disadvantage to play an Elvish and Llanowar Elf or whatever, because now you have the little dinky 1/1, which is not really worth a card in a lot of sort of formats. Even in regular Limited, like we don't play 1 mana 1/1s in like retail Limited ever unless they have lots of upside. So yeah, I think that's a great way to frame the ramp spells. And you're right that Llanowar Visionary it is a real card. 2/2 that's something that'll battle. I want to talk just very briefly about Sporeweb Weaver, which is just one of the most rude anti-aggro cards they've printed in ever. It's just, this deck just says, I'm sorry, you can't win now if you're an aggro deck. This is a 2 and a green for a 1/4 spider with a reach and hexproof from blue. And whenever it's dealt damage, you gain a life and you make a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. This is just, God. This card is another example of a card that would be, I think, very competitive in my cube, but I will not play because it is so good in certain matchups and so irrelevant in other matchups that I'm just not interested in that amount of swinginess.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's pretty interesting in that I really enjoyed the Enrage mechanic in Rivals of Ixalan, but at the same time, it didn't end up being super relevant. A lot of times things just like traded in combat and you got like a minor upside. This is a card that gives you a lot more space to actually play into it, and I love anything that makes Saprolings, so I would definitely consider it.
Yeah, it blocks everything. Everything. What kind of 4-power threats is your opponent going to have before your third turn? Probably none, is my guess.
That is a great question.
You mentioned Scavenging Ooze here. You want to talk about that?
I just think it's worth mentioning. I think it's going to be a really fun card to play with in Limited, especially as they've been printing some of these more like expensive reanimation spells, which is interesting. Like I think that they have shied away from reanimation a little bit, but recently because it is challenging to balance. Like if they say here's this like 2-mana reanimate, then it means they have a limit on what's like the most busted thing they can do. So both putting Scavenging Ooze into the format and printing some of these more expensive reanimation spells, I think can lead to very interesting gameplay. Similarly, I really like the Obsessive Stitcher. I've had an opportunity to play this in Sealed, and the loot effect combined with a reanimation effect is a really fun combo. So I think all these cards are going to work really well together to make a pretty fun environment.
Right, you've already been playing these on Arena.
Yeah, I'm 1.5 Sealeds deep.
All right. Well, cool. Yeah, Obsessive Stitcher is also really cool. Let's read that card too. It's 1 blue and a black for a human wizard that has an activated ability. You can tap it to draw a card, then discard a card, so it's a looter. And then you can pay 4 mana to sacrifice it, tap it and sacrifice it, and return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. So yeah, like you mentioned, this is a great job of like fueling the actual reanimator deck and then being the reanimation spell itself. It's both sides of what you need to put a big threat into play, which is a very tight little package. I like it.
Yeah, because like reanimation is really a 3-card combo, so it can be a pretty rough. And especially when you're talking about these really, really efficient, high power level cards, it can be just like the most fragile glass cannon. Like, do you draw the 3 parts of the combo? Does your opponent not have any interaction? Cool, you win. So this being like a longer game, it can block for a while, gives you some loots, and then get a little bit of extra value. Maybe you bring back a Waker of Waves. I really love that kind of gameplay.
Big whale. Love it.
Whale.
Last card I have on my list here is just Spark Hunter Masticore, which I think is noteworthy because I'm always interested in the ways that Wizards is giving us to interact with Planeswalkers more directly. Mm-hmm. So this is 3 generic mana for a 3/4. It's a Masticore, so it has the Masticore additional cost, which is that you have to discard a card to cast it. It's kind of funny that thing stuck around. I don't know what the original like lore is behind like that mechanic or why that is on the original Masticore, but it's followed on all subsequent Masticores since the first one was printed. This particular one has protection from Planeswalkers, and you can pay 1 to have it deal damage to target Planeswalker. You can also give it indestructible for 3. So a lot going on in that card. And it's just this little, Planeswalker killer that comes out to eat Planeswalkers for breakfast. What is your take on the Planeswalker interaction that we've been seeing, including this Spark Hunter Masticore?
I'm all about the just like murder that can also target a Planeswalker type cards. Those seem very reasonable. This seems a little bit weak if you're not fighting Planeswalkers. So it feels more like a sideboard card. And unlike the previous Masticore we saw that had Persist, it's harder to actually feel like I'm getting 2 cards worth of value out of it. So I'm kind of medium on it.
Yeah, the lesser Masticore from Modern Horizons had a really interesting take on the discard cost in that it had Persist, so you got 2 permanents worth out of the 2 cards you spent on it. Here, if you can't afford to pay that 3 to give it indestructible, then it could just be a 3-mana 3/4 that makes you discard a card, which is not great. I think the Planeswalker card type is really elegantly designed because what it allows Wizards to print is these kind of incremental value engines that are often seen on artifacts or enchantments, but they're printed in a way that is fundamentally interactive for almost every deck in the history of Magic. Like the deal with powerful build around enchantments or artifacts is that if your opponent has no removal for them, then they can be kind of broken and too strong because there's no way for your opponent to stop your engine. If your opponent does have a disenchant or whatever, then it's kind of a blowout for you because you spent a bunch of mana, you built your whole deck around this value engine, and then your Burning Vengeance just gets disenchanted and you feel real bad about yourself. And so Planeswalkers, the fact that they can always be attacked by creatures, and so many decks in Magic across all the different formats do just have creatures to attack or burn spells to deal damage. Kind of makes them fundamentally very interactive, which I think is nice. It does feel to me like the Planeswalkers that have been printed are really the most powerful cards in most formats of Magic right now. We're just seeing very powerful Planeswalkers, which I think is by design. I think these are like the kind of the protagonists of the game of Magic. They want them to be very powerful, very impactful. But as a result, I feel like that sort of fundamental flaw that they can just be attacked is somewhat undermined by the sort of extreme power level we've seen of Planeswalkers recently, which is why we're seeing cards like Spark Hunter Massacre, I think, which is like, all right, well, we need to print some specific answers to these things. Another more extreme example is like the Elder Spell from War of the Spark, which is this like just insane sideboard card if you're playing against Planeswalkers, but if you're not, it does nothing, literally nothing. So yeah, I have mixed feelings about it. I almost wish that we were just that the scales were tipped a little bit differently so that Planeswalkers weren't so much better than non-Planeswalker threats that we needed to see this kind of like specific sideboard or like specific targeted stuff to deal with them, because I love that inherent limitation they have, the inherent flaw of being able to be attacked.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I do kind of enjoy just the sort of mechanical flavor of 1 mana to deal 1 damage, like playing this on turn 5 or 6 when your opponent has a Planeswalker they think they've protected and just mowing it down. It's going to be kind of exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I have an emotional attachment to Masticore's. The original card, Masticore, was my favorite Magic card when I was a kid.
And that makes you discard every turn. Is that true?
Yeah, that one makes you discard every upkeep. Or else you have to sacrifice it. But it's also very powerful, at least for the time. It's been kind of left in the dust by modern Magic cards. But at the time, it was kind of a staple of most constructed decks because of how powerful it was. Also, just the art is very sick on it. I had a lot of emotional attachment to that card. So I always look with excitement whenever new Masticores are printed. But yeah, this one just kind of reminds me of the fact that Planeswalkers are really pushed now, and they end up being very defining of a lot of formats. And yeah, for that reason, I would also like to see more efficient Planeswalker removal. A quick shout out to Eliminate, which is a 2-mana black instant that we got in this set that either destroys a creature with power 3 or less, or destroys a Planeswalker converted mana cost 3 or less. I like that card a lot. Playing that in my cube, it's pretty pretty straightforward. Not the most exciting card in the world, but happy to get that kind of stuff because I think we need it given the power of Planeswalkers that are taking over Magic. Is that it, Anthony? We have anything else to talk about Core 21?
I think we've done it. I think we've done it pretty well.
All right, sum it up. What's your number one card you're most excited about for the set?
Oh God, I should know these things. I mean, it's Waker of Waves, right?
That's the card I'm most excited about for my cube for sure. That's the card I think is like designed the best way. I will say that actually emotionally, the card I most want to get my hands on, like the card I most hope to open like a foil version of, is probably Conspicuous Snoop from my little Goblin EDH deck. It's just too perfect. I love that little guy. All right, well, this has been the first episode of Lucky Paper Radio. And thanks for tuning in. So Anthony and I both write for a site called Lucky Paper, luckypaper.co. We do surveys for every set that comes out where we ask people that have cubes to tell us what cards they are testing in their cube. And then we analyze all that data, make a cool graph out of it, and then basically publish it so that people that are coming back to Magic after some time away can see what other cube designers have added from different sets. And also so we have this kind of like historical record of what we collectively as Magic players thought our first impressions were of individual cards, which means we can look back, years later and say, oh, we were wrong about this or right about this. Let's improve how we think and talk about Magic cards. So if you want to do that, you should go to luckypaper.co/survey, and then you can go to /M21 or /JMP. I'll put those links in the show notes down below. Anthony, anything else? Oh, you're streaming on Twitch these days.
Yeah, I'm going to experiment a little bit with streaming. It's not something I would normally be doing, but in this period of not seeing people that much, anything I can do to play Magic in a way that feels a little bit more communal is very appealing.
Oh, we're so desperate for human connection. Yes. Please, people, connect with us.
Connect with us. Talk about Magic.
Yeah, so you can find Anthony on Twitch at AnthonyBMKTPT. That's Bun Magic Kitchen Table Pro Tour. I will also put that link in the show notes so you all can have it. Thanks for chatting, Anthony. Let's do this again soon, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for talking about Magic with me.
Yeah, we need to come up with some sort of sign-off. You have any immediate thoughts?
No.
All right. Well, me neither.
And on that bombshell.
It's hard to be creative.